In 37 cycles of running Galaxy's Edge salvage and reclamation, I'd never seen anything quite like this human. I was conducting my morning inspection, all three of my arms occupied with their usual tasks, checking inventory on my datapad, adjusting the gravity field modulators, and moving aside a piece of twisted hull plating when she walked through the atmospheric barrier. The slight shimmer of the barrier's force field caught her red-gold hair, making it flash like hot copper. She was tiny. That was my first thought. Barely half my height, with only 2 arms, and what looked like absurdly delicate bones. Like most of her species, she appeared desperately under-equipped for manual labor, yet she moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. "Welcome to Galaxy's Edge," I rumbled, setting down the hull plating. "I am Liffin, proprietor. How may I assist you today?" She smiled. Humans do that a lot, I've noticed, and shifted the large metal box she carried. It looked ancient, covered in scratches and dents, with Morgan-daughter hand-painted on its side. "Emily Morgan," she said, extending one of her 2 inadequate arms. "I'm looking for a ship." I returned her greeting gesture carefully. Humans are surprisingly resilient, I've been told, but I'm always worried about crushing their fragile appendages, new or salvage. "We have an excellent selection of certified pre-owned vessels in Lot C." "Actually," she said, those strange human eyes scanning my yard with unsettling intensity, "I'm interested in that." She pointed toward the back corner of Lot F, the designated scrap lot. I followed her gesture and my primary heart nearly seized. "The Centaurian light freighter. Miss Morgan, I apologize, but that vessel is marked for recycling. It's beyond repair. Mind if I take a look?" I gestured with my maintenance arm while using my dominant one to pull up the ship's file. The hull has multiple breaches. The reactor core is crystallized. Navigation systems are completely fried. Eyes that a Mark IV gravitational compensator. She was already climbing over debris to reach the wreck, her strange human eyes lit up like plasma coils. "Miss Morgan, please understand, that ship has been officially designated as hazardous salvage. The reactor core alone." "How much?" I blinked, all 4 eyes in sequence. Excuse me, how much for the whole wreck?" She had set down her box and was running her hands along the ship's scarred hull, examining the damage with what appeared to be growing excitement. "Miss Morgan, perhaps I'm not being clear. This ship cannot be repaired. The structural damage alone—" "I'm not looking to repair it," she interrupted, and that human smile grew wider. "I'm looking to rebuild it. Better than new." I checked my translator. Surely there was some malfunction. "That's not the regulatory standards clearly state." She opened that battered box of hers and pulled out a tool I didn't recognize. It looked like it had been modified from at least 3 different technologies. "My dad always said regulations are just suggestions wrapped in fancy paperwork." Her voice got slightly softer. "He also said anything can fly again with enough love and elbow grease." "Elbow grease?" My translator definitely needed maintenance. She named a price. It was more than the scrap value, which made no sense because the ship was obviously only good for scrap. But something in the way she looked at that wreck, it reminded me of how I'd looked at my first salvage yard back when I was barely more than a hatchling. "I'll need you to sign multiple waivers," I said, already regretting my decision, "and acknowledge that this vessel is being sold as is, with no warranty or guarantee." Of the sound she made when I agreed to sell might have been a laugh or a sob. Human emotional displays are complex. She quickly signed everything I put in front of her, barely glancing at the documents. As I watched her begin to work, pulling out more strange tools from that battered box, I had the strangest feeling that I was witnessing either the beginning of something brilliant or something catastrophic. Possibly both. She spoke softly to herself as she worked, though my translator couldn't pick up most of it. "Something about wait till you see this, Dad, and just like you taught me." I realized I was still standing there, all 3 arms hanging uselessly at my sides, watching as she fearlessly began dismantling systems that should never be touched without proper containment protocols. That's when my secondary heart joined my primary one in its anxiety. What had I just done? I didn't sleep well that night, my dreams full of reactor breaches and regulatory fines. But when I arrived the next morning, she was already there, covered in grime, grinning like a mad thing, as she held up what appeared to be a fusion of Centaurian and Rigelian tech that should have been explosively incompatible. "Watch this," she said. And despite every safety protocol I'd ever learned, I did. 2 weeks. 2 weeks of watching Emily Morgan break every safety regulation in the Galactic Salvage Code and somehow not die. I found myself spending more and more time in Lot F, ostensibly to monitor for safety concerns. In reality, I couldn't look away. It was like watching a simultaneous disaster and miracle, if such a thing were possible. The power coupling is completely incompatible with the Rigelian thrust matrix. I explained for perhaps the dozenth time, all three arms gesturing in frustration. The resonance frequencies will already solve that, Emily said from somewhere inside the engine housing. Her voice echoed metallically. Pass me the blue thing from Dad's box. Looks kind of like a sonic wrench had a baby with a quantum spanner. I carefully reached into her father's toolbox. Every item inside seemed to have been modified, rebuilt, or completely reinvented, just like what she was doing to the ship. I selected something that matched her description and handed it to her outstretched hand. Perfect. There was a series of sounds that made my scales bristle. See, Dad figured out that if you reverse the polarity and then route it through a modified Draxian power converter Draxian. I interrupted, my voice rising an octave. But that's pre-FTL technology. Exactly. Emily's head popped out, her face streaked with grease and glowing with enthusiasm. Their stuff was built to last through anything. Sure, it's not as efficient as modern tech, but it's practically indestructible. Dad collected old Draxian pieces whenever he could find them. I watched in horrified fascination as she proceeded to integrate the ancient technology with components from at least 3 different modern civilizations. My regulatory training screamed that this would result in a catastrophic failure, but the diagnostic panel showed improvement. That's impossible, I muttered, checking the readings again with my third arm, while my other 2 hands anxiously adjusted my maintenance uniform. Impossible just means nobody's tried hard enough yet, Emily quoted, and her voice took on that soft quality it always did when she was repeating her father's words. Hand me that plasma torch. The one Dad modified with the Andromian focus and crystal. By now, word had spread through the yard. My regular customers started finding excuses to wander past Lot F. Some didn't even bother with excuses, just stood and watched. Emily didn't seem to notice, lost in her work and her running commentary to her absent father. Remember that trick you showed me with the gravitational dampeners, Dad? Watch this, I found myself taking notes. Not that I would ever attempt such regulatory-defying modifications myself, of course. Purely for documentation purposes. When she managed to increase shield efficiency by 47% using parts from a broken food replicator, I added 3 pages to my observations. One morning I arrived to find her sitting on the hull, legs dangling through what used to be a breach, now seamlessly repaired using a technique I'd never seen before. My dad used to say that understanding machines was like understanding people, she said, not looking up from the circuit board she was modifying. They'll tell you what they need, if you just listen right. I thought about the neat categories in my inventory system, the proper procedures, the designated protocols. I thought about how many of those she'd completely ignored, and how her impossible modifications were consistently producing better results than factory specifications. How do you know it will work? I asked finally, watching her connect components that every engineering text said were incompatible. She was quiet for a moment, her hands still moving with practiced confidence. Dad taught me that everything has potential. Sometimes you just have to be the first person to see it. She patted the hull beside her. This old girl, she's got plenty of life left, just needs someone to believe in her. That evening, after she'd left, I found myself standing in front of the ship, really looking at it. Not seeing the categorized parts and designated salvage values, but trying to see potential. Impossible, I muttered again, but this time it sounded less like a declaration and more like a question. From somewhere in the ship, a hybrid system of Centaurian, Rigelian, and pre-FTL Draxian technology hummed in perfect harmony, defying everything I thought I knew about spacecraft engineering. I added another page to my notes. The day of the test flight dawned with all 3 of our system's suns aligned. A good omen, if you believe in such things. I found myself hoping it was true, despite my usual disdain for superstition. Emily had worked through the night. When I arrived, she was running final diagnostics, her father's toolbox open beside her like a faithful companion. The ship was beautiful. Not in the sleek, standardized way of factory vessels, but in a way that spoke of possibility and defied conventional thinking. Are you certain about this? I asked, all 3 of my arms clutching different diagnostic tools. The salvage authority representatives are already here, Emily finished, grinning as she wiped her hands on her coveralls. I invited them. My scales rippled with alarm. You what? She patted my maintenance arm. Trust me, Liffen. Dad always said the best way to change the rules is to show why they need changing. The crowd that had gathered was larger than I'd expected. News of the crazy human's impossible ship had spread beyond my regular customers. I recognized several prominent shipwrights, a handful of competing salvage yard operators, and my heart's nearly stopped. 3 stern-looking salvage authority officials. Emily walked the perimeter of her ship, running her hand along the hull just as she had that first day. But now, instead of scarred and broken, the metal hummed with potential. She stopped at the entry ramp and pulled something from her toolbox, an old-fashioned metal nameplate. Dad and I always talked about having our own ship someday, she said softly as she attached it to the hull. Second Chance gleamed in fresh paint. The pre-flight sequence was flawless. Systems that should have been incompatible worked in perfect harmony. The hybrid reactor core, a fusion of technologies that violated at least 15 regulations, purred like a contented earthen feline. When Emily lifted off, the ship didn't just fly. It danced. The test flight lasted 23 minutes. In that time, she demonstrated maneuverability that exceeded factory specs by 34%, shield efficiency that made the salvage authority officials drop their datapads, and power consumption rates that defied conventional physics. After landing, while the crowd was still murmuring in disbelief, Emily emerged with that familiar human smile. She walked straight to the salvage authority officials. I'd like to apply for an innovative engineering license, she announced, and I want to register a partnership with Galaxy's Edge Salvage and Reclamation. I nearly dropped all my diagnostic tools. Partnership. She turned to me, suddenly looking less confident. If you're interested, Dad always said the best businesses are built on complementary strengths. You understand systems and regulations better than anyone I've met. I just see possibilities. Together, she gestured at the ship. The lead salvage authority official was rapidly updating her database. This would require creating an entirely new category of licensing, she muttered. Yes, Emily agreed cheerfully. Several new categories, probably. Maybe a whole new division. Humanity's just getting started out here, you know. There's going to be a lot more of this. That's when I realized what had been nagging at my consciousness these past weeks. Humans weren't just another spacefaring species joining the galactic community. They were something entirely new. A species that looked at our carefully organized systems, our established rules, our impossible barriers, and saw potential. I heard myself say. The partnership. Though we'll need to reorganize the entire yard. Create new categories. Update all the protocols. Emily's smile widened. Or we could just start seeing what's possible and let the categories sort themselves out later. The first new customer arrived before the salvage authority officials had even left. A young Regulian engineer, clutching blueprints and eyeing a pile of what I had previously classified as unsalvageable components. Emily opened her father's toolbox. What do you want to build? In my office that evening, I looked at my meticulous inventory system, my careful categorizations, my regulatory compliance certificates. Then I looked out at Lot F, where Second Chance sat gleaming in the triple sunset, proud and impossible and full of potential. I opened a new file and labeled it Innovation Protocols, Draft 1, to be revised as needed. In the yard below, I could hear more humans arriving, their voices full of excitement as they dug through piles of what I had once classified as worthless. Each of them carried their own toolboxes, their own impossible ideas. I added a note to the file: potential is not bound by categories. It sounded like something Emily's father might have said. It sounded like the future. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave it a like and to subscribe if you'd like to see more. Feel free to comment and share it as well. With all that said, go on and check out the video in the top left. I think you might like it.